I learned early how to bow without kneeling, how to love without being seen. The crown taught me desire has a price, and I was willing to pay it. Silence. What I carried in my chest would one day choose who survived me. Each morning began with measured footsteps and polished stone. Silk whispered along corridors, and vows were spoken softly as if walls could listen. I shared bread, glances, and careful smiles within a court that prized restraint above truth. Affection was practiced like a skill, perfected in public, guarded in private. Beyond the windows, banners shifted with the wind, and steel was never far from reach. I believed ambition could be shaped into loyalty, and loyalty into peace, until the drums beyond the gates began to answer my heartbeat. I was born knowing the weight of crowns before I ever touched one. The palace raised me in silence and stone. Corridors whispered names of those who ruled before me, and those who died, believing they would. From my earliest memory, ambition was not taught to me as hunger, but as inheritance. It sat beside my plate. It breathed beside my bed. It watched me from the painted eyes of kings long dead. I learned early that affection was currency, loyalty, a contract, love, a strategy. I did not resent this. I accepted it as truth. Each morning I walked beneath banners heavy with dust and history. Servants bowed without meeting my eyes. Courtiers smiled with practiced precision. The council chamber smelled of ink, wax, and restrained fear. Every voice carried purpose. Every pause carried meaning. I listened more than I spoke. That too was taught. The heir arrived at court during the winter of my 17th year. He was not announced with ceremony. No trumpet declared him. He entered as one who already belonged, his presence bending the room without effort. He was tall, composed, trained in the discipline of command rather than the theater of it. When his gaze crossed mine, it did not linger. It assessed. I admired that. He was destined to rule. I was destined to ensure the realm survived his reign. Those were not the same thing. Our first conversation was brief, formal, public. We spoke of border skirmishes, of grain stores, of treaties fraying at their edges. He spoke with clarity, conviction, and a quiet impatience for ornament. I answered with restraint. Neither of us smiled. The court watched. From that day, our paths entwined by necessity. Councils, private briefings, strategy sessions conducted beneath maps marked with bloodless lines that represented lives. We learned each other's rhythms, his decisiveness, my foresight, his trust in strength, my belief in timing. It was said we complemented one another. It was also said that alliances like ours ended in ruin. At night, alone in my chambers, I considered the shape of power. It was never a crown to me, it was leverage, it was anticipation, it was knowing which silence to break and which to protect. I had been trained not to desire the throne, but to control its direction. The heir was both asset and obstacle. War gathered beyond our borders like a patient beast. Reports arrived daily, troops mobilized, neighbors tested resolve with incursions disguised as misunderstandings. The realm's peace was brittle, maintained by threats more than treaties. The heir believed in decisive action, swift engagement, a display of strength to discourage prolonged conflict. I believed in endurance, in letting the enemy reveal itself fully before striking, in preserving internal unity before spilling external blood. These were philosophical differences, not disagreements. Yet philosophy kills as surely as steel. Our conversations grew longer, more private. He trusted me with plans not yet shared with the council. I offered counsel without contradiction, shaping outcomes through suggestion rather than refusal. It was a delicate dance, and we both understood its steps. At times, I wondered if he saw me as I saw him. Not as friend nor enemy, but as instrument. If he did, he never showed it. Affection crept in where it was least welcome, not tenderness, respect, a recognition of shared burden. We spoke openly of duty, of the loneliness of command. He confessed doubts in moments he believed were unobserved. I listened, storing each admission carefully, as one does with dangerous knowledge. This was political love, the kind that does not warm the heart, but steadies the hand. The palace did not sleep. It listened. Eyes lingered longer. Whispers multiplied. The council began to fracture along familiar lines, those who favored immediate war and those who counseled restraint. The heir stood firmly with the former. I was expected to stand with him. Instead, I stood beside him. There is a difference. I began to see the future in pieces, not as prophecy, but as inevitability. The war would come. Victory would demand sacrifice. The heir would be celebrated, then blamed. The throne would survive, but the realm would fracture beneath it, unless guided otherwise. The thought came to me not as treason, but as responsibility. What is betrayal if it preserves the crown? I watched the heir across council tables, across banquet halls, across moments of rare, unguarded laughter. I knew his strengths. I knew his flaws. I knew which decision would break him and which would crown him in blood. I also knew which path I would choose if forced. Ambition does not shout, it waits. On the night the first true declaration of war arrived, sealed in black wax, I stood alone before the windows overlooking the capital. Fires burned in distant quarters where fear had already taken hold. Bells rang, slow and measured. The heir would call for arms at dawn. I would stand beside him, and I would begin preparing for the moment I would have to turn away. The war did not arrive with chaos. It arrived with structure. Orders were issued, messengers dispatched. The machinery of conflict moved with unsettling elegance. I watched it all from within, knowing that ambition thrives not in disorder, but in systems that believe themselves righteous. The heir assumed command as if he had been waiting his entire life for permission. His voice carried certainty. His posture invited obedience. The generals deferred. The council applauded restraint, even as they sharpened arguments for escalation. I stood where I was expected to stand, close enough to be seen as loyal, distant enough to remain unreadable. Love, I learned, does not soften ambition. It refines it. We spoke late into the nights. Maps spread between us. Candles burned low as we weighed villages against fortresses, men against momentum. He believed the war could be ended quickly, that a decisive blow would spare the realm prolonged suffering. He spoke of honor as if it were a shield. I spoke of supply lines, of winters, of rebellions born from hunger rather than defeat. He listened. He always listened. And then he chose his path. It was not arrogance. That would have been easier to undermine. It was conviction, forged by years of being told that hesitation was weakness. I saw in him the ruler he would become, and the fractures that would follow. My loyalty was never in question. My usefulness was. The council began to lean on me, quietly at first. A question here, a pause there. They asked what I believed, not what the heir planned. They sought reassurance without openly defying him. I gave them measured responses, truths shaped to fit the moment. This was the beginning of my division, not between right and wrong, but between allegiance and outcome. The heir noticed the shift before anyone else. He did not confront me. He watched. His trust remained, but it tightened, like a grip that senses something slipping. One evening, after a particularly brutal report from the Eastern Front, he dismissed the guards and poured wine himself. That alone was an admission. He asked me if I believed the war would define his reign. I told him all reigns are defined by what they survive. He smiled at that. A rare thing, brief, earned. He spoke then of legacy, of being remembered as the king who acted, not the one who delayed until the realm bled internally. He spoke of his father's caution, of how it had invited contempt. He would not repeat that weakness. I heard what he did not say. He feared being seen as inadequate. He feared history's judgment more than the present's cost. That fear bound us closer than affection ever could. I felt the pull of him then, not desire, alignment. Two forces moving toward the same center for different reasons. Political love thrives on such convergence. It convinces you that compromise is intimacy, yet every word he spoke clarified my dread. If he continued, the war would consume more than borders. It would justify purges, silence dissent, harden him. He would win, perhaps, but the realm would fracture beneath the victory, and I would be remembered as the one who stood beside him while it happened. Duty is a heavy thing when it begins to contradict itself. At night, I lay awake, measuring futures. In one, I remained loyal, guiding him gently, hoping restraint would come too late but not entirely. In another, I intervened decisively, redirecting power through channels that would not bear his name. Both paths required betrayal. One was simply quieter. The war intensified, casualties rose, victories were announced with increasing urgency, as if volume could replace stability. The people began to murmur. The council began to calculate, and I began to understand my true position. I was not the heir's shadow. I was the realm's contingency. Ambition, I realized, was not my desire to rule. It was my refusal to allow history to collapse into a single will. When the heir reached for greater authority, bypassing deliberation in favor of command, he did so believing I would follow. I did not correct him. Correction would have revealed intention. Instead, I prepared. I secured loyalties not to myself, but to continuity. I listened, I remembered, I positioned. All the while I stood beside the man I loved in the only way I was allowed to love him, by ensuring his reign would not destroy what it claimed to protect. If that meant standing against him one day, then that day would be chosen with care. Love does not absolve betrayal, it gives it purpose. The council ceased pretending unity when the third province fell. It was not a strategic loss, it was a symbolic one. The enemy had not taken a fortress or a capital. They had taken a name that carried memory, a province loyal beyond question, governed by a bloodline intertwined with our own for generations. Its fall did more damage than any battlefield defeat. The council chamber filled early that morning. No one lingered in the corridors, no one exchanged pleasantries. Even the candles seemed reluctant to burn brightly. When the heir entered, the room rose as one, yet the air remained heavy, resistant. He took his place at the head of the table, hands resting calmly upon the polished wood. He did not look at me at first. That too was a signal. Voices rose quickly, accusations disguised as concerns, questions sharpened into challenges. The War Council demanded broader authority. The Treasury argued depletion. The clerics warned of unrest framed as moral decay. Each faction pressed its own survival as if it were the realm's. The heir listened, expression unmoved. When he spoke, the room stilled. He announced a consolidation of command. Regional lords would answer directly to the crown. Delays would no longer be tolerated. Dissent would be addressed swiftly, decisively. It was the language of necessity. It was also the language that precedes fracture. I watched faces tighten. Some nodded in relief, others in calculation, a few in fear. Power always clarifies allegiance. When his gaze finally met mine, it lingered longer than protocol required. He expected affirmation. He expected alignment. I inclined my head. Not agreement, recognition. That distinction would soon matter. After the council dispersed, several members remained behind. They did not speak at once. They waited, as if timing itself needed permission. When the doors closed, their voices lowered instinctively, even though no guards remained. They spoke to me as if the heir were already a fact of history rather than a living presence. They asked whether the realm could endure such centralization, whether the heir understood the limits of obedience. Whether there existed alternatives that preserved strength without igniting rebellion. They did not ask me what I planned. They asked me what I knew. I answered carefully. I spoke of risks without condemning intent, of consequences without assigning blame. I reminded them that loyalty is tested not in victory, but in endurance, that a crown may command armies, but it cannot command memory. They listened too closely. By the end of the conversation, it was clear they believed I held influence beyond counsel, that I might serve as balance should the heir tip too far. They did not name it. They did not need to. The pressure mounted in subtle ways. Invitations extended and withdrawn. Decisions delayed until my presence was confirmed. Documents passed through my hands before reaching the heir. I did not ask for this authority. That is why it was given. The heir noticed, of course. He summoned me privately that evening. No attendance, no wine, no pretense of ease. He stood by the window, armor unfastened but not removed, as if he could not decide whether he was at war or at rest. He asked me whether the council trusted him. I told him, trust is not static. It shifts with circumstance. He asked whether I trusted him. That question carried weight, not because of its simplicity, but because of its timing. I told him I trusted his intention. He turned then, slowly, and studied me as if I were a battlefield he had not yet mapped. There was no anger in his eyes, only calculation. That unsettled me more than fury would have. He spoke of necessity again, of speed, of the danger of divided command. He said the realm could not afford hesitation, masked as wisdom. He said that power must act or be overtaken by those less scrupulous. He asked me if I disagreed. I did not. Instead, I asked him how he intended to govern once the war ended. The question landed harder than I intended. He paused, breath caught between irritation and reflection. He admitted he had not considered peace in detail. Victory occupied his thoughts. Stability, he assumed, would follow. Assumptions are luxuries of those who do not fear consequence. I told him peace requires different tools than war, that systems built for obedience struggle to release it, that a ruler who centralizes authority in crisis must be prepared to dismantle it afterward or be defined by it. He listened. He always listened. But I saw then that he had already crossed an internal threshold. He no longer believed restraint could save the realm. Only dominance could. When I left his chambers, I felt the shift within myself complete. The council's whispers grew bolder. Plans were discussed in parallel. Safeguards, they called them. Contingencies. They framed them as loyalty to the crown, not to the man who wore it. They spoke of regencies, of temporary authority, of guiding hands should the heir's path endanger the realm. They spoke as if I would lead such efforts. I did not refuse. Refusal would have been interpreted as naivety. Instead, I asked questions. Who would support such measures? Who would resist? What conditions would justify intervention? How public opinion might be shaped without inciting panic? These were not treasonous inquiries. They were administrative. War creates shadows where ambition thrives unnoticed. I moved within those shadows with care. Every step justified, every conversation deniable. I positioned myself not as challenger, but as stabilizer. And still, I stood beside the heir in public. We rode together through the capital before the next campaign. The people cheered. They always do when given a figure to cling to. He acknowledged them with solemn grace. I watched their faces, searching for fear beneath fervor. I found both. That night, reports arrived of unrest in the southern districts. Not rebellion, protest. The heir ordered increased patrols. The council suggested concessions. I suggested patience, paired with visible reassurance. The heir accepted my counsel. It was the last time he did so without question. As the war stretched on, victory came at increasing cost. Each gain demanded harsher measures. Each delay invited scrutiny. The heir's authority expanded, justified by necessity. The council's tolerance thinned, justified by consequence. I existed between them, no longer merely advisor, not yet adversary. Political love is cruel in this way. It binds you to the rise of someone whose fall you must anticipate. You admire their strength, even as you prepare for its excess. I loved the heir for his resolve. I feared him for the same reason. The realization settled slowly, then all at once. The war would not decide the realm's fate, the response to it would. And I was being positioned, deliberately or not, as the one who would determine that response, whether through guidance or betrayal. The war crossed a threshold the day the borders ceased to matter. What had begun as a defense of territory became a struggle of dominance. Alliances shifted. Neutral houses armed themselves. Old treaties were reinterpreted with convenient malice. The enemy no longer tested our strength. They sought to exhaust it. I felt the urgency before it was named. Supply routes strained. Messages arrived late or not at all. Commanders acted independently, citing necessity. The structure the heir had imposed held, but only through constant pressure, like a dam forced to bear more water than it was designed for. Silence became my greatest concern. In council, voices grew fewer, not because consensus had been reached, but because dissent had learned the cost of being heard. The heir did not order punishments openly. He did not need to. His authority alone altered behavior. Fear, once external, had found a place within the walls. I watched him change in increments small enough to deny. His decisions sharpened, his patience thinned. He spoke less of the people, more of outcomes. Victory became an end rather than a means. He was becoming the ruler war requires. I was becoming the one it resists. Our private conversations grew strained. Where once he invited perspective, he now tolerated it. He no longer asked what I believed, only whether I could implement what he had decided. The distinction mattered. One evening, I brought him a report from the Western Front. A commander had razed 3 villages suspected of harboring enemy scouts. The evidence was inconclusive. The casualties were not. He read the report in silence. When he looked up, his expression was composed. He said it would discourage future cooperation with the enemy. I said it would ensure it. For the first time, tension surfaced openly between us. He accused me of idealism. I accused him of forgetting the difference between fear and loyalty. The words were restrained, but their weight was not. He reminded me that the realm's survival demanded harsh choices. I reminded him that survival without legitimacy is merely prolonged collapse. He dismissed the conversation, not in anger but in finality. That night, I understood that my influence had reached its limit. Beyond the palace, the war pressed closer. Refugees gathered at the capital's edges, markets faltered, grain prices rose. The people began to question not the war itself, but its endlessness. Questions are dangerous in times of command. The council approached me again, this time without pretense. They spoke of emergency provisions within the charter, clauses written for moments when the crown's judgment endangered the realm. Measures never intended to be invoked, but preserved as insurance against absolute authority. They asked whether such a moment had arrived. I told them not yet. That answer bought time, not resolution. Privately, I began to act. I established lines of communication independent of the heir's command. I ensured key military leaders understood where authority would rest should a transition become necessary. I spoke to provincial governors about maintaining order without excessive force. I did not frame these actions as preparation for removal. I framed them as continuity. The war brought news of a decisive opportunity, a chance to strike deep into enemy territory, to cripple their command and force capitulation. The plan was bold, risky. It required committing reserves meant to defend the capital's approaches. The heir embraced it without hesitation. The council fractured openly. Some saw salvation, others saw catastrophe. I saw both. I requested a private audience with the heir before the decision was finalized. He granted it, though his demeanor suggested obligation rather than desire. I told him the capital would be vulnerable, that unrest could become revolt, that a single failure would expose everything we had preserved. He told me fear was no longer an acceptable advisor. I told him fear is the first sign of wisdom. He stood then, towering, and said something I had not anticipated. He said the realm needed leaders willing to risk everything, not caretakers clinging to what already decayed. The words were not meant to wound, they were meant to define. In that moment, I saw the future clearly. He would pursue this path until either the enemy fell or the realm did. There would be no pause, no retreat, no recalibration. I bowed and withdrew. The decision was announced at dawn. Troops mobilized, reserves redeployed. The capital's defenses thinned under the justification of imminent victory. The people cheered, they always cheer before understanding. As the army marched, I stood upon the battlements and watched banners disappear into the distance. The city felt exposed, hollow, like a heart that has sent too much blood to its limbs. Messages arrived of unrest turning violent in the south. Grain convoys disrupted. A governor requesting emergency authority to impose order. The heir was beyond reach. The council looked to me. The war had created its shadow, and that shadow now rested fully upon my shoulders. I understood then that waiting longer would not preserve loyalty. It would only make betrayal inevitable. The breaking point did not arrive with a single decision. It arrived as an absence. The heir was gone from the capital, gone from reach, gone from the delicate equilibrium that had kept his authority tethered to counsel. In his place remained edicts, messengers, and the echo of certainty. That echo filled every chamber, pressing against walls already strained. I felt the silence he left behind more keenly than any argument we had shared. Reports accumulated faster than they could be answered. The southern unrest hardened into open resistance, not a rebellion in name, but in behavior. Tax collectors were turned away. Garrisons refused orders that demanded force against civilians. Governors asked for clarification that never came. The council convened without ceremony, no banners, no formal seating. The gravity of the moment stripped away ritual. They spoke plainly now, urgency overriding decorum. They said the capital was vulnerable. They said the people were frightened. They said the charter provisions could no longer remain theoretical. They asked me to act, not to rule, not to replace, to hold. The distinction mattered to them. It mattered less to me. I requested time, not to decide, but to breathe within the narrowing space of conscience. I returned to my chambers and closed the doors, as if wood and iron could protect me from the weight pressing inward. Ambition had always guided me forward, quietly, patiently. But now it collided with something more fragile than fear: attachment. I thought of the heir as he had been when he first arrived at court, controlled, principled, unburdened by the necessity of cruelty. I'd thought of the nights spent over maps, of shared understanding, forged not through affection, but through purpose. I had loved him as one loves a future, carefully, strategically, with belief. And now that future was slipping beyond salvage. A messenger arrived from the front. The decisive strike had begun. Initial success reported. Enemy resistance collapsing faster than anticipated. The words were triumphant, but the margins were thin. Losses were heavy, reserves nearly spent. Victory, if it came, would come exhausted. Another message followed: riots in the capital's outer districts, fires set, storehouses breached. The city watch overwhelmed in places where sympathy outweighed obedience. The war had come home. I stood at the window again. As I had on the night of the first declaration, the city below was no longer distant. I could hear it now. Shouts, bells rung without order, the sound of fear untethered. The council returned, this time with a document already prepared. The Charter Clause, temporary authority vested in a steward of the realm until stability was restored. It bore seals already pressed, names already committed. All that remained was mine. I told them to leave it with me. When I was alone again, I read the document slowly, each word precise, each justification sound. It framed action as preservation, not defiance, continuity, not overthrow. And yet I knew what it truly was. A fracture. Once enacted, the realm would never be the same. Neither would the heir, neither would I. I imagined his return, victorious perhaps, hardened, finding his authority diluted in the name of order, finding me standing at the center of what remained. Would he understand? The question itself was a betrayal. Understanding was no longer relevant, only consequence. I thought of what would happen if I did nothing. The capital would bleed. The council would fracture further. The people would learn that the crown could march abroad, but not protect its own heart. Even a victorious heir would return to a realm already broken, and I would have loved him into ruin. Ambition narrowed then, not into hunger, but into resolve. I did not desire the authority offered. I resented it, but resentment does not absolve responsibility. As night fell, the fires in the city spread, not everywhere, just enough to show how thin control had become. I summoned the city guard commanders. I spoke not of loyalty to me, but of duty to the realm. I authorized grain release. I suspended certain levies. I ordered restraint paired with visibility, not suppression. I signed my name at the bottom of the charter as dawn approached. The ink dried quickly. By the time the council reconvened, authority had already shifted. Orders bore my seal, messengers rode in my name. The capital breathed, if unevenly. Relief flickered across some faces, fear across others. I felt neither, only the weight of a choice that could not be undone. Word was sent to the front, carefully phrased, authority assumed temporarily, measures enacted for stability, no accusation, no condemnation, just fact. I knew how it would read to him. I knew how it would feel. Political love teaches you many things: how to wait, how to yield, how to shape outcomes without claiming them. It does not teach you how to survive the moment when shaping becomes severing. As the sun rose over a quieter city, I stood at the center of a realm held together by a decision I never wanted to make. I had not taken the crown. I had taken the burden. And I knew, with absolute clarity, that when the heir returned, there would be no path back to what we had been. The heir returned not in triumph, but in urgency. The decisive strike had fractured the enemy's command, but not destroyed it. Victory lingered just beyond reach, demanding more men, more time, more certainty. He rode hard for the capital, summoned by reports he did not yet trust. I was informed of his approach before the gates were opened. I did not go to meet him. That, too, was a decision. The city held its breath as his banner appeared on the horizon. Soldiers lined the streets. Citizens gathered in cautious silence. This was not a homecoming. It was a reckoning delayed by formality. When he entered the palace, he went first to the council chamber. Finding it empty, he came to me. No guard stood between us. No council waited to mediate. Only stone walls that had heard centuries of vows and verdicts. He did not ask permission to enter. He looked older, not from time, but from compression. War had folded him inward, tightened his edges. His armor was scarred, his expression was controlled, but beneath it I sensed the same certainty that had driven him forward, now sharpened by interruption. He spoke my name once, not as greeting, as indictment. He held the charter document in his hand, the seals unbroken, the words already known. He asked me if it was true. I told him it was. He asked by what right. I told him by the realms. That was when the distance between us became absolute. He accused the council of cowardice. He accused me of manipulation masked as stewardship. He said the war demanded unity, not interruption, that my actions endangered everything he had fought to secure. I did not deny any of it. I told him the capital had been on the verge of collapse, that unrest had spread faster than his victories, that authority without presence breeds resentment, not order. He said I should have waited. I said waiting would have cost lives he would never see. The argument did not rise in volume. It deepened. Each word was measured, controlled, weighted with consequence. This was not an emotional confrontation. It was the collision of two visions that could no longer coexist. He asked me if I believed him unfit to rule. The question was not rhetorical. I answered carefully. I said I believed him necessary in war and dangerous in its aftermath. He laughed then, briefly, without humor. He said history would remember him as a conqueror betrayed by hesitation. I said history rarely remembers hesitation. It remembers collapse. That was when he understood, not the details, not the justifications, the finality. He saw that I had not acted in fear nor ambition for myself, but in defiance of the path he refused to leave. He saw that the authority I held was not borrowed lightly and would not be relinquished easily. He told me to step aside. I did not. I told him the charter provisions required a formal transition, that until the capital stabilized, authority remained consolidated, that the council stood behind the decision, that the military leadership, weary and divided, would not support internal conflict. I did not threaten him, I informed him. For the first time since I had known him, uncertainty crossed his face. Not doubt of himself, but recognition of constraint. Power, once absolute, had found its boundary. He said my love had always been conditional. I said his had always been transactional. The truth landed between us, irrevocable. He turned away then, as if the room could no longer contain him. He said he would not contest the authority by force, not because he agreed, but because the realm could not endure it. He said he would step back, temporarily. The word hung heavy with promise and warning alike. He left the chamber without bow or farewell. By nightfall, proclamations were issued confirming the temporary stewardship. The people received the news with muted relief. The army stood down within the capital's reach. The council congratulated itself in whispers. I felt none of it. I stood alone in the chamber where the confrontation had ended, aware that something more than authority had been decided. The heir still lived, still commanded loyalty, still believed the future belonged to him. But the bond between us had crossed the point of no return. I had chosen the realm over the man who embodied it, and in doing so, I had ensured that neither of us would ever rule without the shadow of the other. The realm did not collapse. That, in itself, was the first cost. Stability returned in measured increments. Markets reopened. Patrols withdrew from districts where fear had begun to ease. Grain stores were redistributed with ceremony meant to reassure rather than impress. Order reasserted itself not through spectacle, but through absence of further harm. The council praised the restraint as wisdom. The people accepted it as relief. Neither knew the price already paid. The heir withdrew from public view. Officially, he was resting. Privately, he was calculating. I did not seek him out. He did not summon me. The distance between us became a corridor no one dared to cross. Messages arrived from the front confirming what had long been inevitable. The enemy, fractured and exhausted, sought terms. Not surrender, but settlement. The war would end without the clarity of conquest. The heir's war ended without his victory. The council moved quickly. Negotiations were framed as triumphs of endurance. Concessions were labeled pragmatism. The realm would survive, though diminished, and that was presented as wisdom. I signed the accords as steward, not sovereign. My name would appear in footnotes, not proclamations. That, too, was intentional. When the heir returned to council at last, the room stilled. He had shed his armor, but not his authority. He spoke little. When he did, it was precise, restrained. He did not contest the settlement. He did not praise it. He accepted it as one accepts a wound that cannot be reopened. The council discussed succession contingencies without naming them as such. Regents, shared authority, timelines designed to ensure stability rather than legitimacy. The heir listened. He understood exactly what was being shaped around him. He did not resist. That was the second cost. The people's loyalty shifted subtly. They spoke less of glory, more of peace. The heir became a figure of what might have been. I became a function of what endured. Neither of us inspired devotion. We inspired acceptance. At night, I considered what had been lost. Not the war. Wars always take more than they give. I thought of the quiet alignment we once shared, of a future shaped by conviction rather than caution, of the man he might have remained had the war not demanded so much of him, but ambition does not mourn what it replaces. The heir requested a final private audience before he departed the capital, not exile. Withdrawal. He would govern a distant province, restore order where borders still frayed. Officially, it was a vital assignment. Unofficially, it was distance disguised as honor. We met in a small chamber overlooking the inner gardens. No banners, no witnesses, only memory. He did not accuse me again. That time had passed. He said the realm would remember me as the one who preserved it when strength faltered. I told him the realm remembers outcomes, not intentions. He said he would have ruled differently if given time. I did not say what we both knew. That time is the one resource power never truly controls. When he stood to leave, he paused. He said loving me had been his greatest miscalculation. I said loving him had been my greatest restraint. Neither of us apologized. He left the capital before dawn. His departure was unmarked. No procession, no farewell crowds, only a single banner folded and removed from the gate. In the weeks that followed, authority normalized. The council relaxed. The people forgot the brink. The heir became a name spoken with cautious respect, then less frequently. I remained. That was the final cost. Power does not punish betrayal with chaos. It punishes it with endurance, with the knowledge that what you preserved will continue without you being fully part of it. The realm survived, the love did not. And ambition, satisfied at last, left behind a silence that no victory could fill. Shall I continue with Act Wait? The realm did not collapse. That in itself was the first cost. Stability returned in measured increments. Markets reopened. Patrols withdrew from districts where fear had begun to ease. Grain stores were redistributed, with ceremony meant to reassure rather than impress. Order reasserted itself, not through spectacle, but through absence of further harm. The council praised the restraint as wisdom. The people accepted it as relief. Neither knew the price already paid. The heir withdrew from public view. Officially, he was resting. Privately, he was calculating. I did not seek him out. He did not summon me. The distance between us became a corridor no one dared to cross. Messages arrived from the front confirming what had long been inevitable. The enemy, fractured and exhausted, sought terms. Not surrender, but settlement. The war would end without the clarity of conquest. The heir's war ended without his victory. The council moved quickly. Negotiations were framed as triumphs of endurance. Concessions were labeled pragmatism. The realm would survive, though diminished, and that was presented as wisdom. I signed the accords as steward, not sovereign. My name would appear in footnotes, not proclamations. That, too, was intentional. When the heir returned to council at last, the room stilled. He had shed his armor, but not his authority. He spoke little. When he did, it was precise, restrained. He did not contest the settlement. He did not praise it. He accepted it as one accepts a wound that cannot be reopened. The council discussed succession contingencies without naming them as such. Regents, shared authority, timelines designed to ensure stability rather than legitimacy. The heir listened. He understood exactly what was being shaped around him. He did not resist. That was the second cost. The people's loyalty shifted subtly. They spoke less of glory, more of peace. The heir became a figure of what might have been. I became a function of what endured. Neither of us inspired devotion. We inspired acceptance. At night, I considered what had been lost, not the war. Wars always take more than they give. I thought of the quiet alignment we once shared, of a future shaped by conviction rather than caution, of the man he might have remained, had the war not demanded so much of him. But ambition does not mourn what it replaces. The heir requested a final private audience before he departed the capital. Not exile, withdrawal. He would govern a distant province, restore order where borders still frayed. Officially, it was a vital assignment. Unofficially, it was distance disguised as honor. We met in a small chamber overlooking the inner gardens. No banners, no witnesses, only memory. He did not accuse me again. That time had passed. He said the realm would remember me as the one who preserved it when strength faltered. I told him the realm remembers outcomes, not intentions. He said he would have ruled differently if given time. I did not say what we both knew. That time is the one resource power never truly controls. When he stood to leave, he paused. He said loving me had been his greatest miscalculation. I said loving him had been my greatest restraint. Neither of us apologized. He left the capital before dawn. His departure was unmarked. No procession, no farewell crowds. Only a single banner folded and removed from the gate. In the weeks that followed, authority normalized. The council relaxed. The people forgot the brink. The heir became a name spoken with cautious respect, then less frequently. I remained. That was the final cost. Power does not punish betrayal with chaos. It punishes it with endurance, with the knowledge that what you preserved will continue without you being fully part of it. The realm survived. The love did not. And ambition, satisfied at last, left behind a silence that no victory could fill. I did not take the crown. Time took it for me. Years passed in the manner of all quiet reigns, incremental, uncelebrated. The realm endured, as it always had, by adjusting to those who held it rather than loving them. Treaties hardened into habit, borders stabilized into uneasy acceptance. Children were born who never knew the sound of war bells. They would not know his name. They would not know mine. That I learned is what evergreen truly means. Not glory preserved, but damage absorbed so completely it leaves no scar visible to those who follow. I remained steward longer than intended. Temporariness has a way of extending itself when nothing breaks. The council aged. New faces arrived with fewer memories and sharper ambitions. They knew me only as function, not fracture, and I allowed that. Occasionally, reports arrived from the province where the heir governed. He ruled well, firmly, without excess. The irony was not lost on me. Removed from the center, freed from the weight of legacy, he became the ruler he might have been. We never wrote to one another. There was no need. The realm found its rhythm again, slowly, carefully, as all wounded things do. My authority diminished in increments so small they felt voluntary. I relinquished power piece by piece, not because I was asked, but because the time was correct. When I finally stepped aside, there was no ceremony. Another took my place, younger, less burdened, certain in ways I no longer envied. I watched from a distance as the crown passed, not to the heir, but beyond him. Bloodlines adapt when survival demands it. The council framed it as continuity. The people accepted it as fate. History wrote its version. It called the war necessary, the stewardship prudent, the heir unfortunate. It did not call me traitor. It did not call me loyal. It called me absent. In quiet moments, I considered whether I would choose differently if time reversed, whether love deserved more courage, whether ambition had disguised itself as restraint. The answer never changed. Political love is not meant to survive peace. It exists to bridge impossible moments, then vanish before it becomes liability. What we shared was never meant to endure. It was meant to prevent collapse. I lived long enough to see the realm prosper modestly, not gloriously, safely. That is the highest achievement power can hope for, though it will never admit it. When I felt my strength fade, I did not fear judgment, only obscurity. I had shaped the future by refusing to own it, and in that refusal, I had succeeded. I loved the heir I was destined to betray, not despite the betrayal, but because of it. Then this story is complete. What was forged in ambition, tested by war, and sealed by betrayal has reached its end. Nothing more remains to be chosen, only remembered. If this story stayed with you, leave a mark of your own. Like the video so this tale can endure. Subscribe to the channel for more royal dramas shaped by power, love, and betrayal. And tell me in the comments, was this betrayal justified or unforgivable?